I will say 100% is happening right now is this increased notion of national security. There's been definitely a movement of companies trying to push the responsibility on foreign nationals, basically saying, hey, if you're choosing to leave the country and you get stuck in this, let's call it cycle of waiting, then the onus is on you. If you take a look at the statistics are super high in terms of approval rates for extraordinary ability visas. The O1 is the extraordinary ability visa. Some people think of it as the Einstein visa or the Genius visa. Some people will still maintain their H-1B, but they're starting to prepare alternative plans.
Hello, welcome back to the Hindustan Times podcast. I'm your host, Shashank Matu, reporting to you from Washington, D.C. If you've been seeing the news headlines over the last week, you'll know that H-1B visa applicants, particularly those from India, have been facing a spate of appointment delays, having their appointments shifted from the end of 2025 to 2026 and sometimes even 2027. Now, this is because of a new social media presence check that the United States government has put into place to screen for national security risks, and it's causing substantial disruption to the lives of several Indian professionals who work in the United States. But what exactly is going on? What is the motivation behind this policy, and what options exist for Indian professionals who find themselves in these situations? Joining me to answer exactly that question is Nicole Gurnara. She's an immigration attorney at Manifest Law. Nicole, thank you so much for joining us. We've spoken over text a lot. I'm glad to finally have the chance to interview you and talk about this subject a little more in depth. Because what we've seen already over the last week, as I was just saying, is that thousands of H-1B visa applicants, especially from India, as well as their dependents who are applying for the H-4 visa, have seen their appointment dates, which were set for December, set for January, be shifted to later in the year, perhaps even to 2027. Can you just explain what's going on to begin with?
Yes, of course. And of course, thank you for having me. Just to briefly explain what is going on right now is in response to a lot of recent incidences here in the United States, there has been an uptick or an initiative by the government in order to improve, quote unquote, national security. And in order to improve that national security, there has been a strong initiative to go through intense levels or increased levels of scrutiny and vetting through social media activity as well. So in this push to increase social media vetting, they have now extended that review all the way to individuals who have H-1Bs and H-4s as well. The rescheduling is in response to essentially the government's need in order to find time to do that implementation of the new policy, whether it's new training, new systems, new software. It isn't really more clear than that, but a lot of changes are incoming, and that has triggered a rescheduling of those interviews for time for these consulates to implement those new policies.
Right. And we've already seen this in the past before, because earlier this year, the same thing happened with the student visa applications, if I'm correct.
That is absolutely correct, but I think we are feeling it much more. Traditionally, student visas like F1s and their similar variety like the J1, they've always had accelerated appointments, so even post-rescheduling, people were still able to get in pretty quickly thereafter. What we're seeing is the major difference is that in these cancellations for December and January, some people are rescheduled all the way to July and August of next year. That has led to much more pain points or sore points compared to the previous iteration that extended to those student visas.
Right. And could you tell us a little bit about what people who have had their visa appointments pushed have had to go through? Because now, of course, I presume they're going to have to ask for leave for their employers. They're going to have to rearrange their lives. Some of them have come here to do their visa appointments and they've left their families back home in the United States. So they're separated from them for a little while. Talk to us a little bit about that, what you're hearing from people who you're working with.
So there's definitely a wide spectrum of responses. You'll have like the most of severe pain points, right? Individuals who really need this brand new stamp in order to come back to the United States. There is no alternative at the moment. And because they've been rescheduled all the way to July and August of next year, that's going to be 6, 7, 8 months of like essentially not being in the United States, especially those who have much more, let's call it physical or in-person touch point kind of jobs. Think like manufacturing and industrial engineering. What they've been facing is convincing the company to do something else or to let them work remotely. Some people have been approaching offshoring. Some people have been approaching strategies to request for expedited appointments. It's actually been a very, very wide spectrum. A lot of the times, though, employers are really putting the responsibility on the foreign national, and foreign nationals now have to come to the table with negotiating points or alternatives, such as maybe even working in a country that is as close as possible to the US so that they don't have too much of a difference in time zone.
Right. And do you foresee the possibility of job losses, people losing their jobs because they're forced into being in India for long periods of time because of this visa application situation?
100%. I think there has been a very strong movement in several industries for more in-person work compared to the COVID era of remote working. I do think that for maybe some fields, it may not be as disruptive who are extremely pro-remote working, but I can see individuals who work in financial institutions that have been recalling their workers really, really feeling the biggest pain at the moment.
Right. And, we've seen stories come out, Google and Apple, I think, being two major companies that employ a lot of H-1B workers, sending out memos telling their workers not to travel back home to do their application work right now, precisely because of these delays. Is that what you're hearing from clients who are, in the United States, who have H-1Bs, who are now putting off plans to get back home?
Yeah, because here at Manifest Law, we also have our own spate of corporate clients, and that's been essentially the initial feedback. A lot of them are looking to provide policies or to establish policies that say, hey, no non-essential travel. If you're able to stay in the United States, please stay in the United States. And there's been definitely a movement of companies trying to push the responsibility on foreign nationals, basically saying, hey, if you're choosing to leave the country and you get stuck in this, let's call it cycle of waiting, then the onus is on you, or the responsibility is on you to give us those alternatives or to kind of face the consequences, unfortunately, of being away for such a long time.
Right. And, Nicole, in terms of the people that you're working with, what options do they have? I've been speaking to a lot of people. Some of them are looking at expedited appointments, emergency appointments. Are there any suggestions for people who are already stranded in India about how to get out of this situation?
Yeah, I mean, you've already mentioned one example, which is the expedited appointments. And I will say that the more tangible the proof of that expedite, let's say your company is able to prove that they're going to lose a major deal, the better it is. However, what I have told a lot of people to consider is to essentially look at their visa stamps. If their visa stamps are still valid and they don't necessarily need to renew it, even if it's only valid for another few days, that's still enough days to get back to the United States. You are still able to re-enter. I've also told individuals to consider if they're dual citizens or if they have residency in other countries, consider going to those other countries because you can claim that jurisdiction. Also, take a look at your spouse. In some countries, they have accepted that if your spouse is a dual citizen of the country, even if you are not, you can claim an appointment there. I know that this doesn't seem like a lot of availability at the moment, but I would say that at this time, you need to start spreading out as many options as possible. And I do look at spouses a lot for those options, or really those really, really strong and tangible expedite requests.
Right. And, Nicole, this is, of course, coming after, just a couple of months once we saw the $100,000 H-1B visa fee for new visa applicants. And, of course, now you have this, which is making it even harder to get an H-1B visa. To a lot of people, it really does seem like the objective is to make legal immigration, skilled immigration to the United States much harder. At least that seems like the intent on the side of the Trump administration. Do you have a sense of that?
I will say that the intent of the Trump administration to me can be a little bit unclear, right? It seems that even the president himself can make certain statements that either are very, very strong or maybe even much more inclusive than before. I think we've seen how quickly things have changed when it comes to the rhetoric related to foreign national students. However, what I will say 100% is happening right now is this increased notion of national security. They have been enforcing very strongly the definition of what it means to be an immigrant in the United States, being an open book, being very extremely, even radically transparent about who you are and what you are doing. But I think another element that people seem to not really focus on is the push in which direction of the visas that seem to be heavily rewarded. If you take a look at the statistics are super high in terms of approval rates for extraordinary ability visas. And I do think that lines up with some of the thought processes that may be happening under this current administration. We want top skilled talent, the very highest of achievers here in the United States. We are redefining what it means to be specialized here in the United States. And that has led to maybe even a restructuring or a refactoring of what it means to have an H-1B or the usual work visas here moving forward.
Right. Nicole, could you talk to us a little bit more about that? Because while I've been covering these stories about immigration, I've actually had a lot of very talented people tell me that, look, we're not going to be looking to apply for an H-1B as much, but we are looking at the O-1 extraordinary talent visa, which people are looking at as really their pathway to staying in the United States. Could you talk a little bit about this O-1 visa and why it's gaining a lot of popularity among professionals, but especially from India?
Right. So, like you mentioned, the O-1 is the Extraordinary Ability Visa. Some people think of it as the Einstein visa or the Genius visa. Essentially, it's a work visa that doesn't even have like a lottery process like the traditional H-1B. Anyone can apply for it at any time, so long as they have work waiting for them in the United States. And the reason why it's gained popularity is because there's a very clear set criteria for individuals who are either in business, science, athletics versus people who are in creatives. And I wouldn't say that it's necessarily a tick box, but it's a clear process in terms of what you need to qualify. It also has, wonderfully enough, an exceptionally high approval rate so long as you can meet the criteria that the government has defined as high levels of achievement. Individuals who are in the STEM field are actually very likely to meet some of these criteria because it's catered towards them. If you're somebody who's a scientist, you'll have scholarly articles. You've already published academic papers that have made it circles. Some individuals who are tech entrepreneurs are already in press naturally in order to expand, let's say, brand notoriety of their business. So there's just a lot of things that are conducive for that visa that line up with the existing activities of individuals who are trying to come to the United States in some format. But definitely the O-1 has increased in popularity as a successful alternative to the H-1B.
Right. And Nicole, could you give us a sense of how many of these are granted in a particular year? Because, H-1Bs, there's a large volume, I think 65,000 visas plus another 20,000. So that's 85,000 H-1B visas granted every year. Can the O-1 replace that or make up for that shortfall?
I think there's a little bit sometimes of a misunderstanding of how the visa schemes work here in the United States, because outside of like the H-1B that has an annual limit of how many can be issued per year or an annual quota, the O-1 doesn't really have that. The government can approve as many as they feel have qualified applicants. So even though right now there may not be the same number of individuals on O-1s as H-1Bs, there's nothing that actually changes that from being different in the future. It could be that there's going to be hundreds of thousands of individuals coming into the United States under the O-1 so long as they qualify.
Right. And do you see people moving away from the idea of using H-1Bs as much as they have over the last couple of decades, since the 1990s, precisely because of the $100,000 fee, because of the fact that it's also become such a politically controversial issue in the United States?
I think where the trends are going, especially for US mobility, isn't necessarily to just shy away from the H-1B or even to shy away from it at all. It's actually building very resilient programs that include backup plans for individuals. So what have I been seeing happening? Essentially, some people will still maintain their H-1B, but they're starting to prepare alternative plans or prepare the groundwork that would make for a good O-1. So for example, somebody who might have been a career person who keeps extending on their H-1B might start putting together materials such as scholarly articles in order to meet a new criteria to help qualify for the O-1 just in case they need it moving forward.
Right. And does the O-1 have any of those advantages? For example, I've heard people start talking about it. It is also linked to a job, because one of the criticisms of the H-1B that you hear opponents of the program make, and as well as people who are on the program, is that it ties you to a particular job. Does the O-1 have that as well, or does it have much more freedom and flexibility that way?
The O-1 generally has much more freedom and flexibility, especially if it's structured properly. Of course, there's traditional O-1s where it is directly sponsored by a specific employer. However, there are ways to make an O-1 known as an O-1 agent petition, where it can give you flexibility to work for multiple employers or, depending on the circumstances, even your own organization.
Right. So then, Nicole, just two questions to close off, right? The first one is, of course, about what you're recommending people do personally. You've talked about looking for more appointments. You're talking about, of course, of looking for switching to O1 visas. Are there any other recommendations you're making to people who might understandably be quite panicky at this point in time, as well as people who haven't traveled back to India but have that H-1B renewal date coming up and are thinking about what they're going to do?
Right. So for individuals who are already stuck abroad, I really think that this is the season of bringing in your own resources or bringing in your own presentation to explain to the company what can be done to put yourself in the best position to continue working while you wait things out. I understand that that can be extremely stressful, but consider, is there any way that I could be closer to the time zone that I need to be? Is there anything that I can do in order to make my company feel as comfortable as possible with this existing wait time? And also, on top of that, the world is really your oyster when it comes to online usage or the internet. There's actually a lot of people who have built websites or mechanisms to check appointment slots as they become available. So the more that you monitor that, the more that you're kind of quick to get online if there's a new batch of appointments that drop, usually the more beneficial you are in positioning yourself to get back to the United States faster. But for those of you who haven't left the United States yet and you have an upcoming appointment, whether it's in January and February, I would highly recommend that just every single week, take a pause and reconsider whether or not you're going to leave the country to take that risk of potentially not being able to come back very, very quickly. It is possible that things will die down in January or February as the policies kind of get settled in and the process is implemented, but you do need to be checking every single week to see if that's actually happening. So just because the government hasn't necessarily canceled your appointment doesn't mean that everything is completely secured, because in addition to the rescheduling, what we have seen is something known as 221G refusals, where the government says, hey, because we are missing documents or processes, or you're missing documents and processes, we're going to just hold off on adjudicating this case and we're going to ask you to come back. And that question of when you're going to come back is an open question. So do reconsider if that travel is actually essential or not before deciding to leave the United States.
Right. Nicole, I just have to close out on a final question, which is just the mood that a lot of people are in at this point in time, which is that folks who are looking to study in the United States, people who are studying currently in the United States or are working there, are increasingly getting the sense that the United States, which used to be very open to legal, skilled immigration, seems to be moving towards an era where it is more unwelcoming of those things. They're looking at these expanded social media checks. They're looking at the rhetoric that's coming from the Trump administration. They're looking at this $100,000 H-1B visa fee. And a lot of them, I know, are asking themselves that question: is America used to be sort of this dream destination of people to go to live, work, settle down? Is it still those things? Is it still as welcoming as it used to be? And if it isn't, where do people go from here?
I will say that it's a matter of interpretation or opinion, right? I think the question of whether or not things are easier or harder, absolutely, I can understand why people will feel that things just seem to be lurching or taking way more time than they used to. However, I think at the end of the day, the United States is a very strong innovation economy, right? It's very, very hard to at least have that global level of presence without extending yourself to the United States. What I have seen is that students still look at the silver linings or hope, where essentially, hey, if I want to be able to expand my career beyond certain limitations or to really establish myself on the global stage, the United States still continues to be in the picture. Is it now more popular to consider countries that surround the United States or become a permanent resident of a country or a citizen of a country that makes it easier for you to come to the US? Absolutely. But does that mean that there's going to be significant changes to the interest in coming to the United States? I'm not really sure, because funny enough, I feel like more than ever before, we're getting inquiries from brand new individuals who are still saying, you know what, despite the trials and the tribulations, I do want to be here. I want to be able to explore my opportunities here in the United States, and I don't see that changing anytime soon.
Interesting. Nicole Gurnara of Manifest Law, thank you so much for joining us here on the Hindustan Times podcast, helping us break down for an audience that is keen to find out more about this latest H-1B visa news, as well as what their plans are for immigration to the United States. Thank you again, Nicole.
Thank you for having me. And to all of you that are out there that are listening, I know that things can be really, really tough, but at this time, just take a look at your resources that are out there. You never know when there's new appointments or things start to settle down.